Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's Archive presents China Urban Legends EP8 Wuhan Tongji Medical College. Hello everyone. Today's story takes place at Wuhan Tongji Medical College. This story was told to me by a friend named Wang Lei. He's from Yicheng, Hubei, and in 2009 he was admitted to Huazhong University of Science and Technology's Tongji Medical College. He was 19 years old at the time, a kid from a small county town who'd gotten into one of China's top medical schools. He was full of excitement about college life. He said the worst decision he ever made in his life was choosing to study medicine. But what he regretted most wasn't studying medicine itself, it was the things he saw during his 5 years at Tongji Medical College. Tongji Medical College is located in Hankou, Wuhan, on Jiefeng Avenue. The school has a very old history. It was originally founded in 1907 by a German doctor named Erich Paulin, who established the German medical school in Shanghai. Over the next century, it moved and restructured several times, eventually settling in Wuhan as the Tongji Medical College of Huazhong University of Science and Technology. With over 100 years of history, the trees on campus are older than the buildings. Wang Lei said that on his very first day at the school, he felt something was off. It wasn't a sinister feeling, it was an indescribable sense of oppression. The entire campus was surrounded by tall plane trees. Outside the walls, the streets were bustling with traffic and noise. But once you stepped through the school gate, the city noise vanished as if something had absorbed it. Inside, it was as quiet as another world. The building that bothered him most was the anatomy building. The anatomy building sat in the northwest corner of the campus. It was a 3-story German-style structure built of dark gray granite, with rough, weather-beaten walls. The windows were narrow Gothic-style slits, you couldn't see anything from the outside, only dark curtains and the vague darkness behind them. The front wall was covered in creeping ivy, the vines as thick as adult fingers. In front of the building stood several old pine trees with thick trunks, but instead of reaching upward like normal pines, their branches drooped downward like the arms of an old man. Wang Lei said the first time he passed the anatomy building was in broad daylight, in the middle of October when the autumn heat was still oppressive. But when he walked in front of the building, he suddenly shivered. It wasn't the cold of the weather, it was a cold that came from inside his bones, like a piece of ice pressed against his spine. He looked up at the building. On the second floor, through the gap in the curtains, something seemed to flicker, a vague shape, like a silhouette or a reflection of the fluorescent lights. He thought he was seeing things. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Nothing. At the time, he didn't think much of it. Probably a senior student doing experiments or organizing specimens. He found out later that day was a weekend. The anatomy building was closed. The only person in the entire building was the security guard on the first floor. During his freshman year, Wang Lei's curriculum didn't include anatomy yet. They studied basic courses, calculus, physics, chemistry, medical biology. Human anatomy wouldn't come until sophomore year. But that didn't stop the legends about the anatomy building from reaching the new students through every possible channel. The most widely circulated story was this: the anatomy building's basement contained an abandoned morgue. In the early 1980s, when medical conditions were still poor, unclaimed bodies were sent to medical schools for teaching purposes. Later, as the body donation system became standardized, these bodies of unknown origin could no longer be used. The bodies were supposedly moved, but some things were left behind. What exactly? Different versions of the story gave different answers. Some said an arm. Some said a head. Some said a complete sheet of human skin. Wang Lei said he didn't believe any of it. Medical students see specimens all the time, bones, organs, tissue sections. After a while, it's just normal. But his roommate Li Hao, who was from Wuhan, told him these legends weren't baseless. Li Hao's uncle was a retired professor who'd worked at Tongji for over 30 years. One night, after the other roommates had fallen asleep, Li Hao quietly told Wang Lei a story his uncle had told him. According to Li Hao's uncle, the anatomy building's basement did have a problem, not a ghost problem, but a structural problem. The building was built by the Germans in the 1910s. The Germans built things deep, the basement extended at least 3 meters underground. Wuhan has a high water table, situated between the Yangtze and Han rivers. Every rainy season, the basement would leak, water beating on the walls, damp patches spreading across the floor, the air thick with the smell of mildew. In the early 1980s, the school wanted to do something with the basement. Teaching conditions were tough back then. There weren't enough laboratories, so the school decided to convert the basement into a cold storage room for specimens and teaching materials. A construction crew was brought in with jackhammers, electric drills, cement, and rebar, ready for a big job. The crew worked for 3 days and then quit. No amount of persuasion could make them continue. The crew foreman told the school administration 2 things. First, we're not taking this job anymore, and we don't want the money. Second, don't ask me why. Li Hao's uncle was working in the school's logistics department at the time and was one of the project managers. He went to the site himself to find out what happened. The workers didn't want to talk at first, but after a few drinks, one of them finally told the truth. Here's what happened. After the crew pried up the basement floor, they discovered it wasn't solid underneath. There was another layer below. It was a low space, about 1.5 meters high. A grown man couldn't stand upright in it. The floor was dark brown packed earth, hard but with a slight, unsettling give, like stepping on something that had been compressed long ago. One of the workers shone a flashlight down. In that low, cramped space, buried in the earth, they saw something. Bones. Not just 1 or 2. Many of them, packed tightly together, layer upon layer, stacked like firewood. Each skeleton was wrapped in a straw mat. The mats had rotted to a dark, crumbling state, but they still held their shapes. All the skeletons were oriented the same way, heads to the south, feet to the north. 3 workers ran out on the spot. The rest didn't dare touch that layer of earth again. The school called the police. The police came, along with forensic experts and officials from the Cultural Relics Bureau. The forensic analysis showed that the bones were at least 100 years old, dating from the late Qing dynasty to the early Republic period. But the results raised more questions than answers. The skeletons weren't carelessly discarded, they had been buried with ritual care. Each one wrapped in a straw mat, arranged in neat rows, all facing the same direction. This was a deliberate burial, not a random dump or a mass grave. But here was the problem. Tongji Medical College's campus was built on land that, before the 1950s, was farmland and wasteland with a few scattered farmhouses. There was no large cemetery or public burial ground on this site. According to Wuhan's land registry archives, in the 1930s this plot belonged to a landlord named Zhou Rongcheng, who grew medicinal herbs and vegetables here. After the Japanese occupation of Wuhan in 1938, the Zhou family fled to Sichuan and never returned. After the war, the land was requisitioned by the nationalist government for a school. So these bones were not medical school specimens. They were not the remains of a. They were not the Zhou family's ancestral graves. Their origin was a complete mystery. The school administration decided not to pursue the matter further. They refilled the pit, poured a thick layer of concrete, and relaid the floor. The construction crew finished building the cold storage, but no one ever went down to that basement again. The door to the basement was locked, and the key was placed in a cabinet in the logistics office, untouched for decades. Li Hao's uncle later told him something he never forgot. He said, "Some things in that building can't be understood by our generation. The best thing to do is not touch them. They're there, you just pretend they don't exist." Wang Lei's skin crawled when he heard this story. But he told himself they were just old bones. Archaeological remains. Nothing to be afraid of. He didn't know yet that the truly frightening thing wasn't the bones themselves, it was how they appeared. When Wang Lei's sophomore year began, he finally started taking anatomy class. He still remembers the day he first entered the anatomy building. It was mid-November. Wuhan's autumn had ended and winter hadn't fully arrived. The sky was overcast, low gray clouds pressing down as if they wanted to cover the entire city. A cold wind blew off the Yangtze River, cutting through clothes and deep into the bone. The plane trees on campus had lost all their leaves. Bare branches creaked and scraped in the wind. He and 23 classmates stood in the ground floor lobby of the anatomy building, wearing white lab coats. The lighting was harsh fluorescent white, reflecting off the gray terrazzo floor with a sickly gleam. The air smelled of formalin, not strong and pungent, but faint and distant, like the scent of something rotting far away. The staircase was wooden, creaking under every step. The handrail had been polished smooth by countless hands, its original color lost beneath a dark, oily sheen. Paint was peeling from the walls, revealing grayish plaster underneath. Spider webs hung in the corners. Dusty glass bottles were stacked against the walls, their contents impossible to identify. On the second floor, Professor Zhou stood in front of the double wooden doors painted dark gray. When everyone had gathered, he pushed the doors open. Wang Lei said he would never forget that moment. The anatomy lab was enormous, twice the size of a regular classroom. In the center of the room, 6 stainless steel dissecting tables stood in a row. Each table was covered with a white sheet, and beneath each sheet was the unmistakable contour of a human body, shoulders, hips, knees. Outside the tall Gothic windows, the sky was gray. Light came through in slanted columns, cutting across the room. Dust particles floated slowly in those columns of light, like countless tiny organisms suspended in the air. Professor Zhou walked to the first table. He reached out and slowly pulled back the sheet. Wang Lei said the silence in that room was unnatural. Not tense silence, a deep, heavy silence. 24 people seemed to stop breathing at the same moment. Everyone was staring at the body on the table. An old man. His face was waxen, his forehead deeply lined, his hair thin and graying. His lips were slightly parted, as if he were about to speak. His eyes were tightly closed, but his expression was remarkably peaceful. Like he was sleeping. Like he would wake up at any moment. Professor Zhou spoke. His voice was calm, but in that quiet lab, every word fell clearly into everyone's ears. "This is your first teacher. Remember his name, Li Guohua. He passed away in 2008 at the age of 74. Before he died, he signed a body donation agreement, giving his body to medicine. He was a retired worker from Wuhan. He never married, and no family members claimed his ashes after his death. But his body will be the first textbook on your journey to becoming doctors. Respect him." Wang Lei said that when Professor Zhou said those words, his eyes suddenly welled up. Not from fear. Not from disgust. From a complicated emotion he couldn't name, something stuck in his chest that he could neither swallow nor spit out. A man, unknown his entire life, without family or children, with no one to claim his ashes after death. But before he died, he made a decision to give his body to a group of young medical students who would never know him. Why? What did he get out of it? Wang Lei thought about it for a long time. He couldn't find an answer. But the things that happened later that day turned his emotion into confusion, and his confusion into fear. The first anatomy class lasted 4 full hours. Professor Zhou explained everything in detail, from the layers of skin to the subcutaneous tissue to the muscles to the bones. Beneath the tables, some students turned pale, some had sweat on their foreheads, some couldn't stop gagging. But no one walked out. When class ended, it was already 5:30 p.m. Darkness had fallen. In Wuhan's winter, the sun sets early. The students filed out one by one, their footsteps thumping down the wooden staircase, fading into the corridor. Wang Lei was the last to leave. His notebook had fallen under the dissecting table, and picking it up cost him a few extra seconds. By the time he gathered his things and reached the door, everyone else was gone. He reached for the door handle. And then he heard a sound behind him. Very soft. Very brief. Like something had dropped onto the floor. He froze. He didn't turn around. He stood at the door, his hand on the handle, listening to his own heartbeat. It wasn't loud, but in that empty lab, it sounded deafening. He waited a few more seconds. No more sounds. Slowly, he turned his head and swept his gaze across the lab. 6 dissecting tables. White sheets. The gleam of stainless steel. The white light of the fluorescents. The deep darkness outside the windows. Everything was normal. He let out a breath and turned to leave. But at that moment, in the corner of his vision, he caught something. The sheet on the farthest table. One corner. Moving. Not like wind. The windows were closed. There was no draft. The sheet wasn't being lifted, it was being pulled inward. Like something beneath the cloth had gently tugged at it. Wang Lei stood rooted to the spot. All the blood in his body rushed to his head in an instant. He said he wasn't scared at that moment. Not because he was brave, because his mind went completely blank. He stood there, staring at that table, for maybe 10 seconds. The sheet didn't move again. The lab was dead silent, except for the low, continuous hum of the fluorescent lights. He told himself it was an illusion. Fatigue from standing all day. Mild formalin poisoning. Anything but what it looked like. He pulled the door open and walked out. He didn't run. He walked down the stairs one step at a time, crossed the lobby, walked out of the anatomy building. The cold wind hit his face, and only then did he realize his shirt was completely soaked through with sweat. He couldn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid, because he kept thinking about that body. The old man named Li Guohua. What kind of person was he in life? Why did he donate his body? Did he ever wonder, lying on that dissecting table after death, whether he would feel cold? Wang Lei said he learned later that this kind of thing wasn't unusual in Tongji's anatomy building. In the second semester of his sophomore year, the school started teaching regional anatomy. Unlike the systematic anatomy of the previous semester, regional anatomy required students to dissect a real human body themselves. It was the watershed course for every medical student. Pass it and you could become a doctor. Fail it and you might want to reconsider your career. Wang Lei said he would never forget the feeling of cutting into human skin for the first time. It wasn't pain, wasn't nausea, wasn't fear, it was a very strange sensation. You knew the person lying on the table was dead. But when your hand touched his skin, you had the illusion that he was still alive, that his heart was still beating, that he would open his eyes at any moment and ask you, "Does that hurt?" During that period, Wang Lei couldn't sleep well at night. Not insomnia, nightmares. He kept having the same dream. He was lying on the dissecting table, the white fluorescent lights blazing above him, a circle of white-coated figures whispering around him. He wanted to shout, but no sound came out. He wanted to move, but his body was pinned down. He struggled desperately, then woke with a jolt to find his hands clenched around his sheets, his palms slick with sweat. He told Li Hao about the dream. Li Hao laughed. That's normal. Every med student has dreams like that. Last year I dreamed a corpse was chasing me, from the girls' dormitory to the cafeteria to the library. Wang Lei felt better and stopped worrying about it. Until one night, around 2 in the morning, Li Hao suddenly woke him up. The dorm was quiet. The other 2 roommates were sleeping soundly. Li Hao leaned down from the top bunk and whispered, "Wang Lei. You were talking in your sleep." Wang Lei asked groggily, "What did I say?" Li Hao was silent for a long moment before answering in a very strange tone. What he said jolted Wang Lei fully awake in an instant. Li Hao said, "You said, don't touch my hand." Wang Lei sat up in bed. He stared at Li Hao's blurry face in the darkness. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Wang Lei said, "I don't remember having that dream." Li Hao didn't reply. He just said, "Go back to sleep. We have anatomy tomorrow." Wang Lei said he didn't sleep another wink that night. The thing that truly made Wang Lei start thinking seriously about whether there was something wrong with that building was a classmate named Zhang Ming. Zhang Ming was the top student in their class. Straight A's, scholarships every year. In the midterm of sophomore year's first semester, he was still ranked 3rd in the entire grade. But starting sometime after that, Zhang Ming changed completely. He started showing up late to class, skipping classes, not turning in homework. He sat in the back row, head down, not looking at the blackboard, not talking to anyone. His face grew gaunt, his eyes sunken, his dark circles so bad it looked like someone had punched him in both eyes. He lost a lot of weight. He hadn't been heavy to begin with, but now his lab coat hung loose on him like it was draped over a skeleton. When classmates asked him what was wrong, he just said nothing. He hadn't been sleeping well. But anyone could see not sleeping well didn't explain it. Then one night, Wang Lei was walking back to the dorm from the library after it closed at 10 p.m. There was a path from the library to the dorms that passed behind the anatomy building. It was drizzling, a winter rain, not heavy but bitterly cold, each drop like a tiny shard of ice on the skin. The streetlights cast a dim, yellow light through the mist, reflecting off the wet pavement. In the distance, he saw a figure standing at the main entrance of the anatomy building. The entrance was a pair of black iron doors, most of the paint peeling off to reveal rust underneath. A large padlock hung on the doors, so rusted it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But that figure was standing in front of the locked iron doors, perfectly still. Wang Lei got closer and saw it was Zhang Ming. Zhang Ming was wearing a white t-shirt and dark shorts. Barefoot. His feet were covered in mud and rainwater. He was standing in front of the iron door, head tilted up, staring blankly at the second-floor windows. Rain ran through his hair, down his cheeks, soaking his thin clothes. His whole body was shaking, the temperature was barely above freezing, and he was wearing only a t-shirt. But he showed no sign of leaving. He just stood there, like a statue. "Zhang Ming? What are you doing?" Zhang Ming slowly turned his head and looked at him. Wang Lei said he would never forget that look. Zhang Ming's eyes had changed completely. Not the usual tiredness or daze, they were utterly empty. Like glass marbles. No emotion, no content. Wang Lei said they weren't the eyes of a living person. A living person's eyes always have something in them, sadness, despair, madness, anything. But Zhang Ming's eyes had nothing. Just black, bottomless holes. When Zhang Ming spoke, his voice was flat, without any inflection, like a machine. "They told me to come." "Who told you to come?" Zhang Ming didn't answer. He turned back and resumed staring at the second-floor windows. Wang Lei called his name several more times. No response. He grabbed Zhang Ming's arm and pulled him away. Zhang Ming didn't resist, following like a puppet on strings. But his head stayed twisted, facing the anatomy building, until the building disappeared around a corner. The next day, Zhang Ming took sick leave. His parents came from Huangshe and took him home. Wang Lei later heard that Zhang Ming had been diagnosed with severe neurasthenia accompanied by stress disorder. He took a year off from school. The school counseling center's records noted long-term rest recommended, avoid contact with stressors. No one knew what that stressor was. But before Zhang Ming left, he said one thing to Wang Lei. Wang Lei had gone to say goodbye. Zhang Ming was standing at the end of the hallway, looking out the window. Wang Lei walked over. Zhang Ming turned and looked at him. His eyes had returned to normal, not empty anymore, but there was something else in them. Something that looked like fear, but wasn't quite fear. Zhang Ming said, Wang Lei, don't go down to the basement of the anatomy building. Never go down there. Wang Lei wanted to ask why. Zhang Ming didn't give him the chance. He turned and walked away. His father carried his luggage ahead of him, his mother held his arm. The three of them stepped into the elevator. The door closed. The floor numbers blinked down, one by one. Wang Lei stood in the hallway for a long time without moving. In his junior year, Wang Lei started his hospital internship. Tongji Medical College has its own affiliated hospital, Tongji Hospital, right next to the school, a 10-minute walk away. It's one of the biggest and best hospitals in Hubei province, with over 10,000 outpatients daily and an emergency room that runs 24 hours a day without pause. Wang Lei was assigned to the surgery rotation. He woke up at 6 every morning, reported to the department at 7, then followed his attending physician on rounds, wrote charts, and assisted in surgeries. A short surgery lasted 2 or 3 hours. A long one could take 7 or 8. There were days when he didn't even have time to use the bathroom. He'd squat in the hallway outside the operating room and wolf down a boxed lunch in 3 minutes. He said those months were so exhausting that he fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. No more nightmares. He told himself this was good. When your body is tired enough, your mind doesn't wander. But some things don't disappear just because you stop thinking about them. One night that winter, a traffic accident victim was rushed into the emergency room. A man in his 40s, riding a motorcycle hit by a truck. Multiple fractures, shattered pelvis, ruptured spleen, massive internal abdominal bleeding. By the time he reached the hospital, his blood pressure couldn't be measured. He was in deep shock. Wang Lei followed his attending physician into the operating room. The surgery ran from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., 6 hours. They gave the patient 4,000 milliliters of blood, removed his spleen, repaired his damaged liver, fixed his fractured pelvis. But the blood loss was too severe. His clotting system had collapsed completely. Blood seeped out of his body like water through a sieve. At 4:12 a.m., the patient's electrocardiogram flatlined. Wang Lei said that was the first time he watched a patient die on the operating table. The feeling, you were just working on this person. He was unconscious, couldn't hear you, but you were holding his organs in your hands, suturing his blood vessels. You knew he was alive. His heart was beating. Blood was flowing. His body was warm. Then, in an instant, the knife in your hand stopped moving. The numbers on the monitor went blank. The thermometer reading started dropping. His body went from warm to cold. You stood there, still holding the scalpel, but there was nothing left to do. That night, Wang Lei didn't go back to the dorm. He walked out of the hospital in his white coat, sat on the edge of a flower bed in the small garden behind Tongji Hospital, and smoked an entire pack of cigarettes. He didn't normally smoke. But that night he felt like he would suffocate if he didn't. When the pack was finished, he stood up. He didn't go back to the dorm or to the department. He walked toward the anatomy building. He said he didn't know why he went there. Maybe to clear his head. Maybe to confirm something. Maybe for some other reason he couldn't explain. He stood at the main entrance of the anatomy building. It was 4:30 a.m. The sky hadn't started to lighten yet. Everything was pitch black. The outline of the building was especially grim in the darkness, like a huge animal crouching in the shadows. No lights inside. All the windows were black, like open eyes staring at nothing. He just stood there. For a long time. Until the sky began to grow pale. After that, he developed a habit. Whenever he lost a patient, he would go stand in front of the anatomy building for a while. Not go inside. Just stand outside. He didn't want to explain why he did it. If he had to say something, standing there made the weight in his chest a little lighter. One time, while he was standing there, Professor Zhou came out of the building. Professor Zhou saw him standing there. He didn't say anything. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one, and offered one to Wang Lei. Wang Lei took it. They stood together in front of the anatomy building for a long time. The air after rain smelled of earth, of grass, and of formalin. 3 smells mixed together, forming a strange odor, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Just unforgettable. Then Professor Zhou spoke. He said something that Wang Lei said he would never forget. I've worked in this building for 28 years. 28 years ago, when I first started, my teacher told me something. He said, the anatomy building isn't a place for the dead, it's a place for the living. What you face here isn't death, it's life. Every body in front of you once lived, once laughed, once loved, and was once loved. Their deaths may have been meaningless, a car accident, a stroke, an emergency that came too late. But their bodies, they can teach you how to save the next living person. That's the meaning of body donation. They died. But their deaths can buy life for others. Professor Zhou finished his cigarette, stubbed it out against the wall, turned, and walked back into the building. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. 1, 2, 3. Fading into the distance. Wang Lei stood outside alone. He stood there for a very long time. But the story didn't end with Professor Zhou's speech. At the end of 2009, the school decided to fully renovate the anatomy building. Repaint the exterior, replace the windows with double glazing, upgrade all the electrical and plumbing, redo the roof waterproofing. The funds came from a special allocation from the Ministry of Health for improving medical teaching facilities. The construction crew arrived in early December. They started with scaffolding on the exterior, then worked floor by floor, removing old pipes and wires. Everything went smoothly, until they opened the wall in the basement. It happened on an afternoon in mid-December. A worker was using a jackhammer to demolish a brick wall near the basement entrance when the hammer suddenly punched through. The space behind the wall was hollow. The worker stopped and leaned in for a closer look. The brick wall had been chipped open to reveal a hole the size of a fist. He shone his flashlight through the hole. Behind the wall was a space. Not small, from the beam of his flashlight, at least 15 square meters. The floor was packed earth. The walls were rough granite. The ceiling was a vaulted brick arch. It looked like a cellar. But this space wasn't on the architectural drawings. According to the blueprints the crew had been given, the area behind that wall was supposed to be solid foundation. The foreman came over to look. He shone his flashlight into the hole for a long time. Then he made a decision, knock down the entire wall and see what was inside. The wall was made of hollow brick, not very thick, about 30 centimeters. It took less than 20 minutes for several workers with sledgehammers to take it down completely. When the dust cleared, everyone saw what was behind it. It was a hidden underground chamber, about 15 square meters. The ceiling was only about 1.5 meters high. A grown man had to crouch to enter. The walls were rough granite covered with ancient black stains. The floor was dark brown packed earth, hard but subtly uneven underfoot. The chamber was completely empty. No furniture. No containers. No symbols. Nothing. But in the corner of the chamber, there was a chair. It was a very old wooden chair, extremely simple in design. No carving, no paint, just the most basic carpentry. The top of the backrest had rotted and broken off. One of the 4 legs had also broken and was held together with a piece of hemp rope. The chair was thick with dust. It looked like it had been sitting there for a very long time. Decades at least. Maybe longer. The workers looked at each other. A sealed chamber, hidden behind a wall in the basement of the anatomy building. No door. No window. The only entrance was a solid brick wall. So how did this chair get inside? The foreman didn't say a word. He had someone carry the chair out and set it in the open area of the basement. Then he had the wall rebuilt, plastered over, and painted white. No one asked where the chair ended up. No one wanted to know. But that night, something happened that made the entire crew fall apart. The worker who had first discovered the hole in the wall didn't go home after work. His wife waited until 11 o'clock, but he didn't show up. His phone went unanswered. She went to the construction site and found her husband squatting alone in the basement corner, tapping on the newly built wall with a small hammer. As he tapped, he muttered the same sentence over and over. Like a broken tape recorder. His wife got close enough to hear what he was saying. He was saying, "Let me in. Someone inside is looking for me. Let me in. Someone inside is looking for me." His wife was terrified. It took several people to pull him out of the basement. He fought violently, kicking, biting, all while shouting that same phrase over and over, "Let me in." The next day, he was admitted to the Wuhan Mental Health Center. The diagnosis was acute stress-induced psychotic disorder. The foreman announced a work stoppage that same day. The remaining work was contracted to a different company. The newly rebuilt wall was never touched again. Wang Lei said he spent a lot of time later researching the old history of Tongji Medical College. In 1907, the German doctor Erich Paulin founded the German Medical School in Shanghai. This was the earliest predecessor of Tongji Medical College. Paulin himself was a legendary figure. Born in Germany in 1862, he served in the Navy as a young man and later studied medicine at the University of Berlin. In 1891, he came to Shanghai as a military doctor and, seeing the lack of medical care for ordinary Chinese people, decided to stay and establish a hospital and medical school. In 1909, Paulin died of illness at the age of 47. His body was buried in Shanghai. But one detail caught Wang Lei's attention. Paulin's remains were reportedly relocated in 1946. According to an internal Tongji University chronology, in 1946, after the university moved back to Shanghai from Lizuang, Sichuan, they did one more thing, relocated Paulin's remains from Shanghai to Wuhan for burial. But where, exactly, is Paulin's grave in Wuhan? Wang Lei searched every major cemetery and memorial park in Wuhan. He found nothing. There is no monument or grave marker for Erich Paulin anywhere on the Tongji Medical College campus either. The man revered as the father of Tongji, his remains were supposedly moved to Wuhan, but there is no grave anywhere in the city. Does that make sense? Wang Lei said he once found an old document in the Wuhan archives, a 1946 Wuhan municipal government file. It concerned a batch of special materials that needed military escort during the Tongji University Medical School's relocation from Shanghai to Wuhan. The document didn't specify what these special materials were. But there was a handwritten note in pencil in the margin, the handwriting very hasty, as if the reader had jotted it in passing. It read, Dr. Pollen's personal effects. Requires dedicated vehicle for transport. No inspection of crates en route. Pollen's personal effects? Requiring military escort? No inspection of crates en route? In 2014, Wang Lei graduated. He didn't stay in Wuhan. He sent out over a dozen resumes and eventually chose a hospital in Guangzhou. He told me his reason for leaving Wuhan had nothing directly to do with Tongji Medical College. He just wanted to move to a warmer city. Wuhan's winters were too cold. The kind of cold that gets into your bones. But I knew that wasn't the whole story. Before he left, he went back to the campus one last time. It was a late June evening. Wuhan's summer was sweltering, the air thick with humidity, like a wet towel pressed against your face. The campus was quiet. Most students had already left for summer vacation. The plane trees along the main road were in full leaf, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. He walked around the campus by himself. The library. The classroom buildings. The dorms. The cafeteria. The emergency room of the affiliated hospital. All the places he'd spent 5 years in. He visited them one by one. Finally, he went to the anatomy building. The old German building looked the same as always. Dark gray granite walls. Narrow, tall Gothic windows. The steep red-tiled roof. The ivy had grown even thicker, covering the entire east-facing wall. The old pine trees in front of the building had aged further, their drooping branches now nearly touching the ground. The second-floor windows were closed. The curtains were drawn. Nothing inside was visible. Wang Lei stood in front of the building for a very long time. The setting sun painted the entire building orange. The ivy leaves had a faint sheen of moisture, dew or rain, he couldn't tell. The air smelled of summer evening, earth, grass, the coolness of approaching night, and a faint trace of formalin. He later said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, "Do you know what I was thinking about, standing there in front of the anatomy building on graduation day?" I said I didn't. He said, "I kept thinking about one question. That thing behind the wall, however long it's been there, 100 years? 200? It was there before I was born. It will still be there after I die. 10 years. 20 years. 100 years. There will always be new medical students walking into that building, picking up a scalpel for the first time, facing death for the first time. There will always be a new Professor Zhou standing in front of the dissecting table, pulling back the sheet, and saying, 'This is your first teacher.' The thing behind that wall, whatever it is, has nothing to do with any of that. It doesn't belong to medicine. It doesn't belong to education. It doesn't belong to anything that can be understood. It's just there. Quietly. Stubbornly. There." Wang Lei fell silent after saying this. I didn't say anything either. After a long pause, he spoke one last sentence. He said, "Sometimes I think about that chair. A chair. In a sealed room. In a wall with no door. How did it get in there? Who put it there? How long has it been sitting there? What is it waiting for?" When he asked me this, I had no answer. I couldn't answer. Later, we hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I kept thinking about that chair too. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day. Wukong's archive, where short is the story, but long is the life.